This conference will now be recorded.
Well, hello, everybody. Happy Hump Day. Welcome to Stamp Chat. My name is Heidi. I work proudly and honorably with the American Philatelic Society. It's one of those days where I feel supercharged and super excited to be a philatelist and to be among this community of really open-minded people that have so much creativity and just this insatiable desire to continue to learn. It really is a wonderful, tremendous community to be part of. And I thank you so much. APS members, thank you so much for your continued support through money, through the APS Cares. Every day I open up my email inbox and there's some sort of note of appreciation. Sometimes it's an edit because you found one of my mistakes, and I really appreciate that as well. But that just goes to show what eagle eyes we as philatelists have, and the sensitivity to nuances and subtleties. So thank you so much. Today we have a really special guest. Her name is Jennifer Gagliardi. She's coming to us from San Jose, California. I ran into Ms. Gagliardi through the David Strickmatter talk, where he did the material culture and speaks in schools, the professor. And I saw that she followed him on Twitter, and then I got in touch with her because so many of us on Stamp Chat love Stamps Teach and how to use stamps in the classroom, and it was a natural fit. Ms. Gagliardi teaches adult education, teaching citizenship, and the fact that she uses stamps in her curriculum is just a fascinating study of semiotics and material culture. And I thought that it would be an incredible opportunity for philatelists to know what she's up to. She's an author, she's got a book on Amazon, and she's a prolific YouTube creator. So I'm really excited to have her on the show, and I really appreciate you taking the time. And I can already say I can't wait to have you on this show again. So welcome, Ms. Gagliardi. I am going to mute myself, and friends, if you have questions or comments, go ahead and use the chat box. I'll be moderating it. If you'd prefer not to vocalize your question or your comment, just put that in the comments so that I know to be the one who is the mouthpiece. Otherwise, when we're finished and it's discussion, listen for your name so that you have an opportunity to show yourself, or use your microphone. I'll call on you if it's like 3 seconds, then I'm going to go ahead so that we don't have too much awkward silence. This is being recorded, and you can find this chat and so many other of our Stamp Chats on the APS YouTube channel under the playlist Stamp Chat. So thank you, everybody. Relax, enjoy, and let's take a marvelous adventure through the symbolisms of stamp and how they relate to U.S. citizenship. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everybody for joining us today. I'm an adult school teacher at Milpitas Adult School, which is just north of San Jose in the heart of Silicon Valley. And if you would like to see this, the slides, this has been posted on my website, US Citizen Pod. You can watch some of my videos on YouTube at US Citizen Pod, and then of course you can contact me through email. Let's get started. I want to talk about life in the suburbs. So when we moved to San Jose, it was basically all orchards that were being turned into housing, tracts of housing. So I grew up going to parochial school, which was a very positive experience there. I was a nice Catholic girl, participated in sports, and then also in Girl Scouting. But one of my big influences besides the church was Star Trek. So Star Trek was on in the late 60s. It was on endless repeats. And to me, it reflected a future where there is going to be peace, justice, government, respect of people's cultures, there's going to be diversity. So that was the future that I was looking forward to. So in Catholic school, we learned that through work and prayer, we can change the world. And Star Trek, I could see a glimpse into that future. Also, when I was going to school, I graduated high school in the year of the bicentennial. So for years running up to the bicentennial, there was the bicentennial minute on, I believe was CBS with Walter Cronkite. There was constant reminders of the bicentennial and our American heritage. Unfortunately, as a teenager, I did not appreciate that. I got to the point where I hated red, white, and blue and anything associated with the American Revolution, and I preferred, I considered myself a European Europhile, and particularly through my studies of German and Latin when I was younger. So I will circle back to the American Revolution, but when I was in high school, just simply didn't appreciate it for what it was. I gradually went to university, and then I graduated. I went on to Silicon Valley. When I was in Silicon Valley, I was a system administrator. And actually during that time we had, I was working for a Japanese company, and we actually had some stamp collectors at the company. So they were always trying to ask questions about getting this American stamp or that American stamp, but they didn't understand some of the symbolism behind the stamp. So I would explain those to my bosses. Also, which was really important to me at that time, being a part of the Silicon Valley, was also the rise of the women's rights movement. And particularly being usually the only woman in many of my IT departments, I really had to basically stand up for myself and basically try to become the very best system administrator. And a lot of my growth was informed by what I learned as a Catholic and through the women's right movement and that information. One of the things that led me to the UN Women's Conference in Beijing in 1995. So as a run up to the conference, I had started a listserv, if anybody remembers those email lists, and women would join that to find out the latest updates about the UN Women's Conference. And eventually I was invited to go as a part of an international team to build a computer standalone computer system in Beijing for the UN Women's Conference and for the NGO conference. So we brought in a Spark 10. We basically attached PCs and Apple or Macs to the Spark 10, and basically had a line running back to the United States. And we were allowing women to share their experiences about the conference and about their own good works in their own home country. So that was an opportunity for me to basically integrate my knowledge of computers with my feminist practice. When I got home, when I was in Beijing, I actually started buying some stamps because the UN Stamp Authority was there and the Chinese Stamps Authority. So they basically was able to pick up some really great covers of stamps that were created and first day covers that were created for the conference. So when I came back, I put these up on the old GeoCities, and I was in the Wellesley neighborhood. And I'm sure everybody's like, oh my God, that's just so old school. But I had a whole series of stamps up there, plus the things that I did. And so I brought in out from what I did with the UN Women's Conference. I started putting up stamps related, of course, to women's rights and women fighting for the right to vote, but I also put up stamps about women's health or international women, or found some really great hand-painted covers. And I was really interested also in rabbits, because at that time I had some bunny rabbits. So during that time, was able to join the Stamp Club Ring, which was basically a stamp club online, and people would link their websites together so we could go and basically see everybody's collections online. So my online collection was much, much larger than my own personal stamp collection. And my stamp collection of rabbits were really, really super popular. And I still see pieces from my collection that I put up on the GeoCities in the late 90s. I see that that stuff saved to Pinterest all the time. So everything changed. I was in Silicon Valley, moving my way up through the IT department, and then everything changed on 9/11. And people had started to be laid off after the Y2K change. And I had been laid off probably in July of 2000. And then when September 11th happened, everything changed. Lots of people in Silicon Valley were out of work. And so I had to move from computer operations. I moved into adult education. So when I was in computer operations and system administration, my hero was Grace Hopper. And I just really appreciated the precision and the military discipline that she had brought into computer science. She was very identifiable as a woman. She was very proud to be a computer scientist. So she really had a lot that inspired me. And frankly, I think we need a stamp for her in the US. But I moved from her being my hero in Silicon Valley to someone like Jane Addams. So as where Grace Hopper was part of the military, Jane Addams was a pacifist involved with very international global peace concerns. And also she started the first settlement house in Chicago, which I was originally born in Chicago. But she was very much interested in integrating the new immigrant into American society, starting English classes and starting people how to operate in American society and get some work training and to move out, not coming in, going immediately into the packing plants of Chicago, but basically providing a good step up so they can move over and integrate into the larger Chicago society. So what Jane Addams did in Chicago really informed adult education at large, because if you take a look at Grace Hopper, you take a look at Jane Addams, the thing that they have going for them is they believe that learning never ends. Whether you're a child or an adult, there's always something to be learning. And Silicon Valley, working in Silicon Valley really fostered that. Well, I had moved into adult education simply because there was an opening. They needed somebody who speak English. They needed somebody who is steady. And I was one of the people who just stepped into the classroom and I never looked back. I had experience because I had grown up with a lot of immigrant families in San Jose. I seemed to be the person who could always understand the foreign computer engineer who was brilliant, but the command of English just wasn't there, or the accent was a little bit too hard. So I was always able to be, quote unquote, the translator for the bosses when they're dealing with those kind of engineers. But here I had an opportunity to basically to move from being a perpetual student, always going to my Unix classes, to being a teacher. So and the part of adult education I went into initially was literacy. So teaching people basically their ABCs, because at that time we had a significant population that was not literate in the Roman alphabet. Also, so the first thing with adult education, they do try to address literacy. They also try to address job training. So there are what we used to call apprenticeship programs in adult education. We always talk about consumer education. And what do I mean by consumer education? Consumer education means how does somebody go out and access, or how does a person go out and access goods and services in the community at large. So in San Jose, if you want to, you could stay in the Spanish neighborhood or the Vietnamese neighborhood or the Chinese neighborhood and never speak English. But in order to have a fuller life, to pass your citizenship classes, or your citizenship tests, you need to get involved with learning the English so you can go to the doctors and go to the right doctors to get insurance, to get your driver's license, to be able to pay bills. So consumer education, or what used to be called consumer education, which has now been renamed as Civics, has really been a part of that. Also, one of the big challenges for students when they come into adult education is that we do use a lot of personal computers. So we do have computer labs. We don't use them for entertainment, so we're not there constantly shopping or going on YouTube. We're using it to help people sharpen their English skills. And so teaching a student how to use a computer to learn something and to learn it in a foreign language is a big, big challenge. And we've been very successful at getting everybody from the most sullen immigrant teenager to people who older people who do not have the computer skills. We've been able to get them on board and to have them acquire digital literacy skills. And that leads to citizenship. So I was not only teaching literacy, but also we needed somebody to teach a citizenship class because the teacher got sick. And then before 2001, it was basically we had this image of people coming through, coming to Ellis Island, seeing the Statue of Liberty. We're thinking about the European immigrants, or perhaps European immigrants post World War II. And the second wave of immigration, particularly in the 80s and 90s and into the early 2000s, I believe in 1964, they passed the Immigration, I'm getting that wrong. Immigration Reform Act, I believe, that basically allowed people from Asian countries to immigrate to the United States. So in the 80s, we started to see a large number of Vietnamese come in. And also in the 80s, we had amnesty for people who were living here undocumented. And so a lot of Hispanic people who had been living in the United States for generations finally were able to, and were basically participating in almost every aspect of American culture. Finally, they were able to acquire citizenship and move forward into even further into American culture, mainstreaming into American culture. So to do that, in the 2000s, after 9/11, there was about 18 to 24 months where there was a transition from INS to BCIS to what we know now as USCIS. And what's the big difference on that? INS was originally part of the Justice Department, and it transitioned to be a part of the new Department of Homeland Security. So there's a change or a refocus of mission. But during that time, a lot of the textbooks were not going out. So even though we were having new concerns, particularly around immigration, we were still using old textbooks based or information from USCIS or the Smithsonian or VOA News, all of which I still use today. But when you have now we were able to access this stuff very freely through the internet. But in the late 2000s, the early 2000s, it was really difficult to access this information and to get new information to feed your students. And the students in citizenship prep would be there for maybe 22 months while they're waiting for the transition from INS to USCIS for the processing of their petitions, et cetera, et cetera. So I had to come up with new information and not just go over the same 100 questions over and over again. And a lot of citizenship prep material is focused strictly on the civics and learning the 100 questions. So what I started to do was I started to create my own materials and to use Realia to teach civics. So for instance, this is just a detail from a geography question, a geography test. And here I'm trying to prompt them with stamps and signs and common household materials for them to remember the questions so they can basically link the things that they see every day, that they touch every day. They can link that information in their minds with what's give them context of their everyday experience. The reason why I was interested in doing that is because I had so many students who were simply able to remember the 100 questions, but they had no idea what this information meant. So using stamps or using money or street signs or whatever case that may be, enabled to give them more of a context and for them to see the immigration or naturalization interview as not something foreign, but something that they actually live in their day-to-day experience, and it was able to take away a lot of the stress and anxiety and give them more understanding. The students understand the culture and what they're asked to do. They're going to be more able as citizens to meet any challenges. So it's very easy to talk about civics using stamps, just so easy. But the big challenge is talking about the N400, and the N400 is the application for naturalization in the United States. And so a lot of people, when they think about the citizenship interview, they think about the 100 questions, but that is actually a very small part of the interview. They only ask you 10 of those civics questions during the interview. And if you get 6 correct, they stop the test and they move on to the N400. Well, what is the N400? This is the application for naturalization, where they ask you about personal information. So for instance, if you're thinking about an ID, a wallet, the first thing that's usually in the window of the wallet is usually your driver's license. And the driver's license will have your name, your address, and your date of birth. All of these are questions on the N400. They're also going to ask you to produce your green card. What is your green card? Your green card is your a permanent resident card, and that's where you basically establish that you are eligible to be a U.S. citizen because you've been legally in the United States for 5 years. And that's a question that a lot of times trips up my students because they use a very difficult word. The word is eligible. So there's multiple syllables in there, and what they're like, well, what does that really mean? It's like, how are you able to be a U.S. citizen? That's the first question. You got to get that question right so you can go on to the rest of the interview. So you can go on to answering questions about your name and your address and everything like that. Also in people's wallets is a lot of times they're carrying money. So a lot of times you can pull out and start saying, well, if we have Benjamin Franklin, can you remember a question about Benjamin Franklin, the citizenship questions? It's like, yeah, what famous thing did Benjamin Franklin do? And then you think, well, he was a U.S. diplomat. He wrote Poor Richard's Almanac. He's on the $100 bill. No, that's not a citizenship answer. Okay, so going through these and demonstrating that the citizenship interview, what people are going to be doing in the citizenship interview, is basically something that they carry around their back pocket or close to your chest all the time, and again, it was enabled the students to make connections between their own personal life and this gatekeeping interview that was coming up. Another thing that I noticed in people's wallets, a lot of times they were carrying foreign coins from their country, a lot of times from their country of origin. So they might be, that would be something that would remind them of their country of origin. And there are many questions about country of origin in the citizenship interview. And they might have a credit card for for travel back home. They might be carrying pictures of their children and their husband or wife. And all these questions, again, are part of what is in the contents of the wallet. And these are questions that are asked during the citizenship interview. One final thing that is not in this picture, but everybody was carrying invariably in my classes, they were all carrying stamps to use these stamps to send information or to send money or to send pictures or whatever they need back to their families back in their country of origin. And that was really interesting because not only was I learning about their circumstances, but here they had the stamps, they knew they were pretty, but they didn't know what they were really about. So it was interesting. It's kind of like thinking about a house, and a lot of houses have a big, what do I want to say, a great big window that basically shows off the house. But there's a lot of little windows in the house too that also people can look in to see people's lives. Hey, I didn't know you had family in such and such a place. But it also enables me to see into some of the things that my students really like. For instance, one student told me she only bought stamps with flowers because she thought flowers were beautiful and she had a beautiful garden in her country. Or one man says, I only want to buy stamps with flags because then I know that the stamps will be, that whatever I send will get to where it goes because the flag is respected everywhere, which I thought was really interesting. So so as I started to develop more and more things for my classes, and I wasn't seeing a real use of Realia in other U.S. citizenship classes, I started my own website called U.S. Citizenship Podcast. So what it was a lot of my students were not able to come to class because they had adult responsibilities. So I created a podcast which basically enabled students to listen to interviews and practice the interviews outside the classroom. And then also this would be a place where people could come and get their classroom materials and study it on their own. And I started this in about 2007, and I've had, I think, close to 4,200 posts since 2007. And so up here, you can take a look at some of the materials that I have, and I know it needs to be updated a little bit, and that's something I'll be working in on summer. But again, a lot of times my focus is going to be on N400 materials. One of the things that I did very, very recently, and I wanted to show you how I use stamps and how I grew it. So in 2008, around Christmas time, I was shopping for holiday stamps. And I thought, wow, this kind of shows we have a stamp at that year. We had a stamp for that celebrated one of the Islamic holidays. We had Hanukkah. We had a religious Christmas stamp, and we had a secular Christmas stamp. And I said, wow, this kind of really shows religious diversity. So I put up the 4 stamps on a blog post and just said something to the fact that USPS holiday stamps shows religious and cultural diversity. Well, I've done that repeatedly, every year. And then 2011, I actually put out a formal PDF or a worksheet that basically showed more stamps and married that with some information from USCIS, and basically talking about religious freedom and their explanation of what religious freedom is. So question 10 from USCIS is, what is freedom of religion? And in 2020, I just put out a new version of this PDF, but I've been able to incorporate more stamps. So I have now something from Lunar New Year and Diwali and Hanukkah, and a couple more stamps that are not pictured here. Plus, I still have the original stamp about religious freedom. I was able to take information from the Smithsonian, which has much greatly simplified the M638 from USCIS, the civics lessons from USCIS. It's put out in simple, clear, and very specific language. I took that, I translated it into Spanish, and I was able to produce a new worksheet that has the stamps in English and in Spanish. And so again, we have many more information about demonstrating religious culture through stamps. Another thing that I did was, and probably this is too messy, but this is a 2-page PDF that basically shows that marries one of the questions about the Pledge of Allegiance and the Oath of Allegiance and the N400. So here we have a line from the Pledge of Allegiance. We have a line from the oath ceremony. We have a line from the N400. And we also have stamps that basically reflect different aspects of, or basically as the connector between them. Now, I think now as a teacher, I think this is great. It's personally good for me, but I think it's too much and too overwhelming for a basic ESL or citizenship student. So maybe I would approach this a little bit differently and break it down a little bit more. Also, just to grow on and start capitalizing on some of the worksheets I did, I started making videos. And I did this one in 2001, inspired by the Go Green series. And what I had done was collected a whole series of stamps from USPS about different views of nature or ecological concerns or soil conservation or anything that had to do with ecology, beginning in probably in the early 40s. And so this is a simple video with music playing in the background, and it just shows or flashes these different stamps in chronological order. And so you get a really nice way to take a look at stamps and to realize that USPS and the United States has been committed to ongoing progress related to the environment. This was particularly an important issue for us as ESL teachers, because if you take a look at these, they're basically, there's verbs in here, and we're always trying to get verbs into more and more of our students' language. And it's kind of like when I was talking about this and trying to really deliver on this lesson, the students are like, student in or teacher, in Vietnam we always compost, we always walk, we always dry our linen. This is what Americans don't do, this is what we do, but we don't have the English to do it. So it's very interesting to see this. So it was really interesting to see how they related to this, not only as an English lesson, but also as a civics and citizenship lesson. So, and they really liked the video because it showed the beauty of America, and they always think of America as the beautiful country. So in preparation for this webinar today, I basically took all the videos that I had produced over the years, and where I had used stamps to talk about different civics questions. So for instance, I'll take one question from the USCIS Civics questions, and I'll match it with a stamp, and you have me talking and explaining the stamp, or matching a historical, some historical content with the stamp and with the question. The reason why I do this is because if you take a look at the stamps, there's not a lot of women, or sorry, if you take a look at USCIS questions, there doesn't seem to be any room for women except one, Susan B. Anthony. Not too much a mention of Hispanic culture unless you talk about the border of Mexico. So using the stamps to basically draw out more of the richness of American culture and enabling students to see themselves as part of this whole process has been very, very important. And I'm thinking about trying to do an entire series of the 100 questions using stamps in the upcoming summer. One of the things, okay, I'm going to talk about doing something wrong in the classroom, and then I'm going to talk about doing something right in the classroom. One of the things that I love to do jigsaw puzzles. And if there's jigsaw puzzles that have to do with stamps, I'm going to be right on it. So I got this one from the Smithsonian one time when I went to Washington, D.C., and I thought, this is great. They have state stamps in here. We'll be able to talk about the states, and the students will learn more about the states. And I was very excited. I put it together and I shared it with my students, and they were kind of like, meh, it's a pretty puzzle. It's nice. Good job, teacher. But I could see that they weren't impressed with it or as excited about it as I was. And I'm thinking, look at the beautiful stamps. And I'm like, yeah, that's nice. And the same thing was, I got this vintage puzzle from around, I think it was called Puzzle in a Can, from 1974. These are all bicentennial stamps. A great puzzle. I still have it hanging up. I just love the beauty of these puzzle pieces, but excuse me, of these stamps. But again, when I would say, look, students, look, you can learn so much from this puzzle, they're kind of like meh. So it's just kind of like, even though there's a visual context, there's not a lot of cultural context. So how do we match that up? Well, one of the things that I did, it finally occurred to me is like, duh, I should let the students put the puzzles together. And so, for instance, this one about the state flowers and birds, this one is only 300 pieces. And this one about the presidents, it's only 100 pieces. So they were very easy to set up in the classroom and for the students to put these together and basically talk about not only the birds, which a lot of people love birds and flowers, and again, reflecting American beauty, but also working together as teams to put these together. So letting the students handle the puzzles, but thereby handling the puzzles and looking more deeply at this kind of stuff is much more important. And I would really suggest, if you're not willing to break out your stamp collection and bring it into the classroom, use puzzles to do that and have your students put that together. I want to go on and talk a little bit more about the N400 and some of the difficulties talking about the N400, which is basically 90% of your citizenship interview. One of the more difficult questions, especially in the Vietnamese community, is what is your country of birth and what is your country of nationality? So some people are born in Vietnam, but they may be born to Chinese parents, and so they may not be considered Vietnamese. They might consider themselves Chinese. Well, the thing is a lot of the Chinese in Vietnam had come into Vietnam during World War II or during the 20s and the 30s, and basically had found a haven in Vietnam, but then they had to leave. Well, do they go back to the mainland, or do they go to Taiwan, or do they go to Hong Kong? So all of these stamps reflect some sort of problematic situation about identity. So for instance, if you take a look at this picture of Vietnam, you have the Trung sisters that are basically repelling Chinese invaders in here. And so some students would say, some Vietnamese would say, yeah, that's really great. Chinese Vietnamese students may not be exactly excited about that. If you have this one down here about Lincoln in the Sun Yat-sen, a lot of people would say, wow, the friendship with China goes so long, and there was and the Chinese were fighting for the same democratic principles, trying to keep the country together that Lincoln did. So there's a lot of connections that can make there. Although some students, especially the students who had grown up under communism, would reject this stamp because they see the nationalist flag. They know who Sun Yat-sen is, but they're not going to pick this stamp because it's like the nationalist son. Some would take a look at this and they say, well, we have a plane flying over the Great Wall of China. That might be a little bit more interesting or a little bit more palatable. And this stamp I thought was really great, showing a Chinese scholar. But the problem with this one is, especially for people from Hong Kong, they say, great, this is from Hong Kong. But, excuse me, this stamp came after the turnover in 1997. So some of my students who carry Hong Kong passports would politely avoid this stamp. And particularly during this time when we're having situations in Hong Kong, this again would be seen as a controversial stamp in my classroom. So again, you have to know your students really well, and you have to let your students critique the stamps and find their own stamps that basically represent their experiences. The next question, one of the more difficult questions is, was your mother or father a U.S. citizen before your 18th birthday? So I love this stamp, Aging Together, and a lot of my students do bring over their parents for child care when they work and they have their parents at home doing child care. So they come to the adult school in the morning, but 2 o'clock everybody is gone because they have to go and pick up their kids from their schools. So this is an important question for our students because sometimes some students have derived citizenship from their parent. That's why they initially asked this question. Sometimes students are sponsors of, or sorry, excuse me, sometimes parents are sponsors of their children's petition to immigrate. So for instance, the older people come, they have permanent residency, perhaps from another older relative. They're able to extend the permanent residency to their children so they can immigrate. So this is a really interesting question about family reunification and seeing what is the dynamics of the family. There's a lot more to say about this, but anyway. I'm really proud of the stamp because this is actually a stamp that was issued in honor of the birthday of San Jose, which was the first civil settlement in Northern California. And one of the problems with this is the address and dates of residence in the past 5 years. Well, in San Jose, we got a lot of problems with housing, and particularly a lot of people are living in illegal housing, or like, hey, you're not supposed to have a house, you're not supposed to have an apartment in your basement. So how do you address these concerns about your address and your dates of residence? There's questions about who lives with you, and there's which might be asked casually during a citizenship interview, but students are put at a loss about that because they're thinking, oh my God, they want to know everything and about the residents, and some of them are not documented. And there were questions about this concerning the 2020 census, which still has been problematic for people to complete during the COVID-19 period. but was really something that adult schools were trying to get out and to get inspire our students to complete, uh, so that we could get adequate representation in California. This one, do you work? I have never had, well, first of all, the reason why they ask this question, do you work or do you go to school? They want to know how you're financially supported in the United States. So it's okay to say you're a homemaker or you're retired or whatever the case may be, but they're going to dig a little bit deeper. It was really difficult for me to find stamps that basically addressed the jobs that my students were doing. So the jobs that they were doing in their home countries aren't necessarily the jobs that they're doing in the United States. However, when they're taking a look at some of these jobs, for instance, doing construction or working on a typewriter or a textile mill, they're like, well, yeah, I did do that. Oh, yeah, I know my dad worked on the railroad. Oh, yeah, I used to do welding, or sometimes I even do a little welding in my assembly job. So this was a really awesome series that was released about building a nation. It was probably the easiest one for my students to identify with, but a lot of the black and white photos, again, did not, of these captured older jobs that they don't necessarily do, or maybe they'll only do a single aspect of it. The stamp that they actually were able to relate to a little bit better was this one from the the Great Depression. And they were basically saying, oh, yes, this is a woman, they're all going to work. They immediately said that they were not able to name a lot of the tasks that were happening in this stamp, but they were able to name the tasks that was happening in this stamp, and that they were all going to work. That one was a farmer, one is a businessman, one is a laborer, one is basically doing a woman laborer. So this one, especially with the determination that people set forth when the immigrants come to the United States to set forth to work, I thought was much more reflective. And I think I need to dig a little bit deeper on this whole work and financial support question. Have you traveled outside the United States? So we have this great stamp of people crossing the bridge to go and visit Canada, which many of my students have done, or flying. They haven't necessarily, some of my Vietnamese students have flown to Paris or have relatives in Paris. A lot of them came over on planes, or a lot of my students drive back and forth to Mexico, and I myself have driven back and forth to Mexico. But again, you have to account for that travel, and for some people that can be a little bit problematic. What is your marital status? Well, who best to display this with Lucille Ball, who the great comedian, who was married to Desi Arnaz, unfortunately was divorced, and here she is single. So it used to be a lot of people would not want to talk about divorce, which was a real stigma or taboo subject, and people are a lot more frank about their marital status. And in fact, finding out some of my students have been married multiple times. And this is a problem when you go to a USCIS interview, because you have to account for the names and your address of ex-spouses, not only your ex-spouse, but your current partner's ex-spouses. So that can be a really difficult and potentially embarrassing situation for some of the students. Do you have any children? So again, a lot of our students have traveled with both adult and younger children. Sometimes these children are petition sponsors of the parents' petition to immigrant. But when you ask a student why they want to immigrate to the United States, because a lot of times they lose a lot of prestige or family connections when they come to the United States, it's almost like they have to begin again. They invariably say, I want my children to have a better life. So a lot of people, they won't do stuff for themselves, but they'll do anything for their kids. So there are questions on there about the citizenship interview. And in fact, this is a tip that USCIS officers use with women who are super, super nervous before their interview. A lot of times they'll ask them about their kids. And when women start talking about their kids, or or fathers talk about their kids, they start calming down, and then they're able to proceed with the interview and be successful in that interview. Continuing on into the N400, there's a lot more technical information that they ask you because it was changed in 2014. They started asking questions. Well, in 2014, it changed from a 10-page application to a 20-page application. So they added more questions in there about moral character. So one of the questions they ask about, have you ever voted or registered to vote in the United States? So fortunately, we have a lot of great stamps about voting rights, and a lot of the students who do become citizens go on to become super voters, and they vote in every election. Have you ever failed to file your taxes? So this is a difficult question simply for the English. They want to know if you pay your taxes every year. So some people, when they come initially to the United States, they don't have any income. Did they fail to file their taxes? No, they didn't file taxes because they didn't have any income. So that's not a failure. But a lot of people have questions about taxes. So this has been, and they get their tax forms at the USPS office, and they basically all meet up at the USPS office on the evening of April 15th to mail those tax forms in. So again, I was really surprised to see that even though the American Revolution was started by a stamp tax, we don't really have any stamps that celebrate the IRS or income tax day. So that might be something to consider. Lots more thing after 2014. They had a lot of questions about war crimes. And some of these questions are just really, really difficult to deal with, and to even talk about sexual assault or child soldiers, or have you committed genocide? A lot of the very technical vocabulary. And a lot of these questions can possibly traumatize a student. So you have to really, really be super careful about the images that you use. I don't think I would, maybe I might use the well, no, I probably wouldn't use either one of these stamps in the classroom, or I would really have to kind of dig into my students' experiences to see what I could use and not use in the classroom about the war crimes, because people can potentially be re-traumatized during that. This is one that has been, this was an article from len.com from 2016. Have you ever been declared legally incompetent? So what is legal incompetence? You can't mentally you don't have the mental capacity to make life decisions for you. So I believe in 1962, they found a bill that basically supported the development of a stamp about the humane treatment of the mentally ill. And I believe people are trying to reintroduce this bill, at least in 2016. In the United States, we are having a higher incidence of Alzheimer's, especially in the Asian community. It's really rising. And so all of a sudden, adult children are having to take legal, what is that called? Not sponsorship. I'm sorry, I can't think of the word right now. Great, it's Alzheimer's. No, they're basically have to support and take legal action on behalf of their parents for their own well-being. Have you ever been arrested or committed a crime? And it was really interesting to see at USCIS, I mean USPS, yeah. that there wasn't very many stamps about crime, and there wasn't even that many stamps about police or law enforcement. However, everybody, when they go, they go to the post office and they wonder what these weird wanted posters are. And several of my students, when we talk about the post office and we do a civics lesson about the post office, they always ask about these weird posters that they see, wanted, and what does that mean. So we talk about the different crimes that people could possibly commit. And that was probably one of my favorite sections in the Postal Museum, talking about the postal police and how they keep our postage safe. And that is a crime that happens a lot in San Jose. We have a lot of porch pirates that come and steal our mail or our packages. So police have to be ever vigilant. We have some final questions, and we're getting to the end of the N400. Have you ever sold or smuggled illegal drugs? Have you ever been a habitual drunkard? Have you ever engaged in illegal gambling? So a lot of people just simply say no, 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 no. But sometimes we do have students who were alcoholics and then went through maybe a the drunk driving program, got sober, and basically says, yes, I am an alcoholic, but I am sober. So, and they're very proud to say that, and just giving them the confidence and the language to say that is really important. One of the other questions that came up very recently is, which has been on the N400, but has been in the news more recently, is have you ever lied to get public benefits? And so some people basically lie to get access to food and housing and medical benefits. Some immigrants, if you're a legal resident, and even people who are undocumented, have legal rights to certain services. But if you lie to get those services, that will disqualify you from citizenship. So sometimes you have to talk about the services that you receive from Social Security or whatever the case may be. You have to account for that. So there might be a monetary fee associated with the services that you receive, and that could potentially disqualify you if you're asking for any fee reductions related to your citizenship application. Finally, the last 5 questions reflect the oath of allegiance, and it's basically, do you support the Constitution and the laws of the United States? And you say, yes, I do. Well, what's the Constitution? Whenever we talk about the Constitution, it is this big "we the people" stamped on people's foreheads, and they basically say the highest law of the land. Well, can you talk about that? Can you talk about what's in the Constitution? A lot of the students will say, well, there's the 3 branches, but then they can start digging through a little bit deeper, because things related to the Constitution probably take up about a fourth of the civics questions. And so they talk about basically this great series, the Americana series, talking about the roots of democracy, really basically speaks to a deeper understanding of the Constitution. Also, they're going to ask you if you're willing to bear arms, and you think, what's this Minutemen doing here? Minutemen is still a very valuable image, especially in our community. I'm in San Jose, just over the border from Milpitas, and in our front of our city hall is a Minuteman with the gun and the plow at the ready. And basically, the intruder was the people from San Jose wanted to come in and basically take over Milpitas. So the people from Milpitas really identify with the Minutemen and how they were willing to defend their city from the encroachment of San Jose. So the whole thing about bearing arms and basically doing it in service of your community. Another thing they talk about, women serving as non-combatants. Are you willing to perform non-combatant services? And previously, women, mostly a lot of women were in non-combatant roles, and now they are moving into combat, but basically talking about having the student being able to identify what is bear arms, what is non-combatant, and then also if they're willing to help in a national emergency. Finally, after their oath ceremony, they get their passport. They're basically, all those hours that they spent in citizenship class are now freed up to go to other exciting meetings. And a lot of our former students, citizenship students, get involved with education advocacy. So if they weren't a part of the school's PTA, they definitely join the PTA because they're interested in pursuing good quality classrooms and bilingual education for their children. So they look to the legacy of Mendez and Brown versus the Board of Education, because these parents stepped up, challenged the school boards to get the best possible education for their children. Also, we have the whole thing after the oath, private concerns and public health. It used to be that if you had cancer, it was a very, very private matter, or any health concerns, diabetes, PTSD, any of these kind of things. Now it's basically, especially when we see with COVID-19, there's a real link between what is private health and public health. So USPS has been really great in delivering health awareness stamps that basically enable people to talk more about their health concerns and able to get help. So these have been really great in our class, and we use them all the time when we talk about health, our health civics lessons. I want to talk about, yeah?
We're at 4:02, honey.
4:02? What does that mean?
2 minutes after 4 o'clock.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we blew through this hour.
Can I just take one more minute?
Please, go for
it.
Okay.
APS lessons. Great lessons here that potentially could be adaptable for the citizenship program. Also from the Postal Museum, especially if we take a look at this wheelchair. This was the wheelchair that basically was used by FDR. And if you want a quick history review, you could read Chris West's book, or you could go to the Postal Museum's summaries about the commemoratives, and do the first paragraph is always about what happened in that year. Second paragraph is the important stamp issues. So they were just really quick way to get through this, and that's it. Stay home, stay healthy, stay strong. Peace out. Any questions?
Nicely done. I see a lot of smiles coming on board from the camera. That was fabulous. I have friends, this is unprecedented. If you don't mind, if we go a few minutes, if you have to go, I understand. But before we do go, Jennifer, I had a person very patient. Are there any concepts you have had problems finding an appropriate stamp for?
Yeah, some of the things, and I have to say, some of it might be my own lack of knowledge about stamps. I'm focused mostly on US stamps. Most of my information is coming from online resources, although I'm really excited to say that I'm a new member of APS. I'm looking forward to just filling up my summer, going to a lot of the courses online. So because I used to go to stamp shows, and now we don't have access to that anymore. I would think that, you know, there's things in there about daily living, but I would like to see more stuff in there about daily living, and probably a little bit more racial diversity in American stamps. as opposed to just talking about countries of origins, probably a little bit more diversity. I would really like to think more about that question, because USPS tries to be all things to all people, but they only have a limited amount of resources. But what they do, they do very, very well.
You would make such a great spokesperson for the USPS. You really do a brilliant job of showcasing and highlighting what we do, what the USPS does well, Jennifer. Thank you.
I do have to do a shout out for their YouTube channel. Why? Because their YouTube channel talks about getting a passport or applying for selective service, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of those videos are directly, we have to use that in citizenship education. And they're basically virtually unknown in the citizenship classroom. So basically, I'm going to be really looking forward to writing up some of those things as lesson plans and say, hey, you got to talk about selective service. Take a look at this video. You got to talk about passive report. Take a look at these videos. So getting the people to, they know that it's their right to carry a passport, but they don't understand everything about going to apply and getting the passport and how to do it for their underage children. So USPS on YouTube is really great for that.
And your YouTube channel, which is US Citizenship, or
US Citizen Pod.
US Citizen Pod, friends, on YouTube. And like I said, Jennifer is a prolific author here. We'll, shameless plug here. Here's Jennifer's book.
Thank you. Oh, no, it's okay. I just really look forward to learning a lot more for you guys and building a stronger citizenship curriculum with stamps. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jennifer Gagliardi, and thank you so much, friends, for joining us from across the globe. I do see Dr. Richard Morrow on the line. I had mentioned him earlier. We're really into symbols and semiotics, so thank you. Again, just a testimony to the infinite nature that stamps capture and hold, and it really is the eye of the beholder of how we're going to present it, how we're going to feel a stamp, how we're going to share it. And it's really awesome how you're using this for citizenship, Jennifer. And I know we'll be seeing you again. So thank you so much for the time you put into this beautiful presentation. Stay safe to everybody. We will have another APS stamp chat tonight at 7 o'clock, the Great Britain pre-decimal system. Decimal stamps and currency. So that'll be a really new twist. I certainly don't know anything about that. So join us. Enrique Santaro will be here. He's an APS member from Hollywood, Florida. So that's at 7 p.m. EDT. If you can't make it, all of our stamp chats are on YouTube, APS YouTube channel playlist, stamp chat playlist. So we'll have this video up there within now and 12 hours. So thanks everybody for tuning in. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, you guys. Just blessing. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your membership. We'll see you later, stamps.org.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Jennifer. Thank you.
Peace out.